There's a particular kind of confidence that sits underneath the decision to pull away from a woman. A quiet belief that absence will do something useful, that the space you leave behind will somehow work in your favor, that she'll miss you, think about you, want you more simply because you're no longer as available as you were. And honestly, sometimes that instinct isn't entirely wrong. Absence can create longing. Distance can sharpen desire. But here's what most men don't account for, and this is the part that genuinely matters. What happens in her mind when you disappear is not a single static feeling that just sits there waiting for you to return. It's a process. A moving, evolving, day-by-day psychological process that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if you don't understand the timeline of that process, you can make decisions that feel strategic, but are actually working directly against you. I've had so many conversations with women about this, about what it actually feels like when someone they were genuinely interested in suddenly goes quiet. And what comes up consistently is not what most men imagine. It's not this dramatic, aching longing from day one. It's not panic. It's not obsessive checking of the phone every 5 minutes. The reality is both more subtle and more significant than that, and it unfolds in stages that are surprisingly consistent across different women and different situations. So what I want to do today is walk you through exactly what's happening in her mind from the moment you go quiet all the way to day 30. Not to give you a manipulation playbook, that's not what this is, but because understanding this process honestly might change how you think about disappearing as a strategy, or how you handle a situation where you've already gone quiet and you're wondering if there's still something to come back to. Let's start at the beginning. Days 1 through 3 are quieter than you'd expect. There's no spiral happening, no emotional unraveling, no dramatic checking of the phone every few minutes. What's actually going on in those first 3 days is something much more composed on the surface and much more active underneath it. When you go quiet, her first response is almost always rationalization. She tells herself you're busy, that you have things going on, that not every person is glued to their phone the way she might be. She's not lying to herself exactly. She's just doing what the mind naturally does when it encounters something that doesn't quite add up. It looks for the most comfortable explanation and holds on to it for as long as it reasonably can. But underneath that rationalization, something else is running quietly in the background. She's paying attention. Not obsessively, not anxiously, but attentively. She notices when a day passes without a message. She notices the silence in a way she probably wouldn't have noticed consistent contact. And that noticing starts to accumulate, slowly, like water collecting somewhere it hasn't been directed. There's also something worth understanding about how women process uncertainty in early or developing connections. For most women, uncertainty doesn't immediately read as attractive mystery. It reads as information. Incomplete information maybe, but information nonetheless. And in those first few days, she's quietly filing it. Not drawing conclusions yet, but gathering data points she'll return to later. She's also watching her own reaction during this window, which is something men rarely consider. She's noticing how much she's thinking about you and using that as a way to gauge how much she actually cares. If you cross her mind frequently and the silence bothers her more than she expected, that tells her something. If it barely registers, that tells her something too. Days 1 through 3 are deceptively calm. Nothing dramatic is happening on the outside. But the internal process has already started, and it moves faster than most men realize. By day 4, the rationalization starts to wear thin. She's given you the benefit of the doubt for a few days now, and the silence is still there. So something shifts, not dramatically, not in a way she'd necessarily describe as being upset. But the energy she was extending toward you quietly starts to pull back. It's subtle, but it's real, and it matters more than it might seem. What tends to happen around this window is that mild irritation begins to surface. Not anger, not hurt, just a low-level friction that she probably wouldn't even name out loud to a friend yet. It sounds something like, "Okay, so this is how he is." And that thought, as small as it seems, is doing significant work. Because it's the beginning of a narrative. A story she's starting to construct about who you are and what you're about, written almost entirely from your absence. This is also the window where her phone behavior changes. In the first 3 days, she might have casually checked for a message without fully admitting to herself that she was checking. By day 5 or 6, she's mostly stopped doing that. Not because she's playing a game, but because the emotional investment that was driving that behavior is being quietly redirected. The attention she was giving to the possibility of you is starting to find other places to land. Something else happens here that's really important to understand. Women talk. Not always, not every woman, but many women process their experiences with people they trust. And somewhere around day 5 or 6 is often when a girlfriend hears about you for the first time in a slightly different tone than before. Less wondering, more mild dismissal. That shift in how she narrates you to others starts to solidify how she narrates you to herself. By day 7, she hasn't written you off, but the warmth that was there at the beginning has cooled by at least a degree. And cooling, unlike heating, tends to be a one-way process without deliberate intervention. Days 8 through 14 are the most psychologically active stretch of the entire 30-day window. And I want to be really clear about that, because this is the part that most men completely underestimate. From the outside, she might look like she's moved on, or at least moving on. She's less focused on her phone, she's going about her life, she's not visibly pining. But internally, this is actually the period where she's doing the most work. And the conclusions she reaches during this window tend to stick. What happens here is what I'd call the internal audit. She goes back through everything. The conversations, the moments, the things you said that made her feel a certain way. The energy between you when it was good. She's not doing this to torture herself. She's doing it to figure out how much this actually matters to her. Because the silence has now lasted long enough that she can't avoid the question anymore. She has to decide, even quietly and privately, what she thinks about you. And here's where it gets really significant. The story she tells herself during this audit is heavily shaped by what came before the disappearance. If the connection felt genuine, if there were real moments of closeness, she's going to feel the loss of that more sharply during this window. But she's also going to start asking harder questions. Was it real? Was he actually interested? Or was she reading into things? Is this a pattern she should pay attention to? That last question is the dangerous one, because once a woman starts asking whether something is a pattern, she's already emotionally preparing for the answer to be yes. By the end of day 14, most women have reached some version of a quiet internal conclusion about you. Not a final, permanent verdict, but a working understanding that will shape how she responds if you do come back. The audit is mostly finished, and whatever it produced is now sitting at the foundation of how she feels. Days 15 through 21 are where something genuinely irreversible starts to happen. And I think this is the part that men who've gone quiet for a couple of weeks most need to understand. Because by this point, the emotional processing is largely done. She's had her internal audit, she's reached her quiet conclusions, and now the mind does what it's actually designed to do with unresolved situations. It begins to detach. Detachment doesn't look like what most people imagine. It's not a dramatic decision, not a conscious choice she makes one morning to stop caring. It's quieter than that. It looks like a day passing where she didn't think about you until evening, then a day where she didn't think about you at all. It looks like the space you left behind getting filled, not replaced exactly, but occupied by other things, other people, other moments that are actually present in her life. The mind abhors a vacuum, and by week 3, It's been filling yours for a while now. There's also a social dimension that accelerates during this window. She's likely spending more time with people who are actually showing up. Maybe someone new has entered the picture, or an old connection has gotten warmer. She's not doing this strategically. She's just living her life, which is exactly what happens when one source of attention and connection goes quiet long enough. Life moves into the space. What's particularly worth understanding here is that the emotional warmth she had toward you, the specific, personal, this guy in particular warmth, is becoming more generalized during this period. You're transitioning, slowly, from someone she has feelings about to someone she had an experience with. That's a meaningful distinction. Feelings are present tense. Experiences are past tense. And once you've moved into past tense in her emotional vocabulary, getting back to present tense requires considerably more than just reappearing. By day 21, the door isn't closed, but it's no longer open the way it was. By day 22, something has settled in her that is qualitatively different from everything that came before it. The confusion of the first few days is gone. The mild irritation of the first week is gone. Even the active processing of the second week has quieted down. What's taken its place is something that, honestly, is harder to reverse than any of those earlier stages. And that thing is indifference. Indifference gets misunderstood a lot. People tend to think the opposite of love or attraction is hatred or hurt or anger. But it isn't. Those emotions still contain energy, still contain investment. Indifference is when the investment has been withdrawn, when your name comes up and there's no real charge attached to it anymore. Not positive, not negative, just neutral. And by the time most women reach this stage, it didn't happen because they decided to stop caring. It happened because the emotional system is intelligent and self-protective, and it stopped allocating resources to something that stopped giving anything back. What's interesting about this window specifically is that she might still think about you occasionally. A song, a place, something someone says might bring you to mind briefly. But the quality of those thoughts has changed. There's a distance to them now, an almost anthropological quality, like remembering something that happened to a slightly earlier version of herself. The emotional temperature around your memory has dropped significantly, and she's not fighting that. She's probably not even fully aware of it. This is also the window where, if a friend brings you up, her response has shifted noticeably. Earlier, she might have had something to say, some feeling to express, some wondering to do out loud. Now the response is more likely a small shrug, a brief acknowledgement, and a change of subject. Not because she's performing indifference, but because she genuinely doesn't have much left to say. The narrative about you is essentially written by now, and narratives once finished are very hard to reopen. By day 28, you are largely a closed chapter. Not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just quietly, the way most things end when they don't get tended to. And I think it's worth sitting with that image for a moment, because it captures something true about how women process prolonged absence. It doesn't end with a decision. It ends with a quiet fading, a gradual withdrawal of emotional energy that happens so organically she might not even be able to pinpoint exactly when it happened. Days 28 through 30 represent something specific psychologically. This is where the reframing completes itself. The story she's now telling about you, about whatever this was, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And she's the protagonist who moved forward. That reframe isn't something she constructed consciously to protect her ego. It's something the mind does naturally to restore a sense of order and self-continuity. She needed the story to make sense, and absence long enough eventually forces the story to find its own conclusion. What this means practically is that if you reappear at day 28 or 29 or 30, you are not returning to a situation that's been on pause. You're entering a situation that has already resolved itself without you. She's not waiting. She's not wondering. She's not hovering at the edge of something unfinished. She's on the other side of it. And getting back to where things were, that specific warmth, that specific openness, would require not just a good message or a good excuse, but a genuine rebuilding of something that has already been quietly dismantled. I want to be honest about something before I wrap this up, because I think it matters. Understanding this timeline isn't an argument for using disappearance more strategically or for calculating exactly how many days you can go quiet before the damage becomes irreversible. That framing misses the point entirely. What this timeline is really telling you is that presence, consistent, genuine, attentive presence, is not a weakness in dating. It's not neediness. It's not losing value. It's not giving too much away. It's actually the thing that keeps the emotional connection alive and growing, instead of slowly winding down. The men who understand female psychology at a real level don't think about disappearing as a tool. They think about showing up as a practice. Not suffocating presence, not anxious constant contact, but the kind of steady, warm availability that tells a woman her emotional investment in you is landing somewhere safe. That's what actually builds attraction over time. That's what creates the kind of connection that doesn't need distance to stay interesting. If you've already gone quiet for longer than you intended, or if you're on the other side of this and trying to figure out whether there's still something worth returning to, the honest answer is that it depends on where she is in this timeline, how strong the connection was before you disappeared, and whether you can come back with something genuine rather than just an excuse. Timing matters, energy matters, and the quality of your return matters far more than most men think to consider. If this gave you a clearer picture of what's actually happening on her end, drop a comment below and tell me which day surprised you the most. I read every single one, and I genuinely love to know. If this is the kind of content that helps you navigate dating with more awareness and less guesswork, a like goes a long way in getting these videos in front of the men who need them most. And if you're not subscribed yet, join the channel. We go deep on this stuff every week, and the community we're building here is one I'm really proud of. I'll see you in the next one.